my challenges were always debt, credit cards, overdrafts, unauthorized overdrafts, rented accommodation, barely saving for a pension. I used to save into my workplace pension at the BBC.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Gift Show.
I don't have loads of money, but I like to look after it for sure.
The theme for season 9 is Money Matters.
I get a text every day telling me what my balance is. I love it. I love it.
My guest today is Penny Haslam.
I'm not about to give advice to families who need to make ends meet, who can't make ends meet, because
Penny, how do you make money within your business?
well, that's a question, isn't it, that I've allowed you to ask. But normally we get a bit upset about that kind of thing, don't we? And say, oh, well, smoke and mirrors. I think there's a great deal of transparency now about different types of business models and how people monetize what they do. So essentially, my business is called Bit Famous, because I was a bit famous, and I used to be on TV and radio in the UK on the news channels talking about personal finance and business and the economy. So that was the stuff I covered. And then I set up in business. So what I do now in Bit Famous, I do training and coaching. And also as myself, I am a professional speaker, often booked as what people call an external speaker or an expert speaker on certain topics. And my topics and my business basically helps people communicate with confidence. So we go into organizations and we support leaders and emerging talent in all the skills they might need in order to have greater impact and influence and more confidence in doing what they do and communicating their messages, their vision, their purpose, all that great stuff. And I absolutely love what I do. I would not go back to news if you paid me, but that's how I make my money nowadays.
Very good. And has your attitude to money changed over the years since you started your professional life?
As my attitude to money, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I've had to work really hard at that, John. And I think this is a really interesting aspect of being an entrepreneur, a small business owner, someone who wants to achieve and help others through what they do and what they offer the world. And so I started on my own 20 years ago nearly. I left the BBC. At the time, I was a producer and I didn't feel like I was going anywhere. Particularly, I got, people get pigeonholed in big organizations. You're doing a job, so how could you possibly do a different type of job? Oh, it's a bit hard for people to wrap their heads around, isn't it? So I took voluntary redundancy, and with that time that afforded me, I decided I would be trying other things, like becoming more like the talent in front of the camera or in front of the microphone. And I basically was a bit of a chancer. What happened was I was very open to all sorts of different types of work to build a network and all the rest of it. And my only model at that point was that I wanted to earn more per hour and work fewer hours. I wasn't suited to the work, the 9 to 5 corporate grind. I burn brightly for a very short amount of time. I'm good at turning up at 11 a.m. and just smashing it. And then about 4 p.m. I'm like, oh, I've had enough now, darling. I've got to rest. What suited me was not what was on offer in employment for sure. So I set up, and that was my only aspiration, was to earn more money per hour and do fewer hours. Simple. And I achieved that over time. But the attitude to money, when I've been trying to step up and improve what I do and earn that more money bit, I've had to really dig deep into the psychology of why I think certain ways and what we think about rich people and wealthiness. And what we think about what we deserve and what we're valued at and how to share that value and communicate it. But also that really boils down to things like getting paid on time, doesn't it? Being able to invoice, being able to understand the chain of command when you're saying, right, I actually need to be paid before I do the work because I've got no leverage after I've done the work. And I don't understand why freelancers or people who run businesses and provide services would ever think about being paid after the event. It's a very risky aspect of doing things. Um, but being able to stand strong around a contract and terms and not feel like I was owed, like they were doing me a favor if they paid me on time, sort of thing. So yeah, I've worked hard at the whole my personal approach to money and what I'm worth, and now I'm really proud to probably be a bit like Stella Artois, reassuringly expensive. I like to think of myself.
You're doing reasonably well in your business. Are you a person who lives in the moment, or do you prefer to save for your pension and retirement?
Oh, well, my background's as a personal finance journalist, and my challenges were always debt, credit cards, overdrafts, unauthorized overdrafts, rented accommodation, barely saving for a pension. I used to save into my workplace pension at the BBC. I got in there before they changed the terms of that, and so I have, a good, favourable pension. And not a lot, but it's a final salary scheme, so that was kind of a good scheme to get in the mid 90s before it changed to be a defined benefit scheme. So I am by nature quite a spontaneous, devil may care sort of attitude. So you'd think that I wasn't particularly on the personal finance aspect of life, saving for a pension, looking after the pennies, opening bank statements, but I absolutely am. And the reason for that is because I did get myself into a bit of a tangle, a bit of a pickle in my early 20s, from going to university with university student loans and debts through to escalating credit card bills, and ultimately an endless feeling of anxiety. And I knew that had to stop. Now, I didn't consciously think, right, I'm going to get a grip, but I found myself, and isn't it funny how we find ourselves learning things that we need to learn? So turning up and sort of finding a job in personal finance programming as a little researcher when I first started, knowing nothing, to then becoming a senior producer before I took voluntary redundancy, knowing a lot about the world of personal finance, gave me insight into what I could and what I should be doing in terms of looking after myself and reducing my anxiety. So it's not just a case of, are you a logical person, so therefore you save into a pension, or are you a bit flighty and therefore you wouldn't? It's about understanding what money does for you, and not like, oh, I want to be able to go on cruises when I retire, but just what it does for my sense of security and well-being now. I'm in my 50s. I don't expect to retire until I'm 70, maybe 75, depends on whether the world will still have me then, whether I'm still relevant. But nonetheless, I just get anxious. If I don't open my bank statements, I get a text every day telling me what my balance is. I love it. I love it. But I never used to. I used to feel very out of control. I had a situation with my credit cards where, and I've actually been saddled with credit card debt for 20 years, and I don't mind sharing that. I thought I was quite clever with it, and I have been as clever as I can be, and then done that classic rate tart thing. I was a single mother. I just bought a house and the mortgage was big and my freelance income was patchy. And I just could never afford to save for my tax, my personal tax bill. So I put it on credit card. I put it on a credit card. I put it on a credit card. So it was more important to me in the balance of life to be in a house where I was paying the mortgage and getting equity and capital build up there than it was to worry too much about the credit card debt, which I could pay off over that 12 months before the next tax bill came along. I don't have loads of money, but I like to look after it for sure. I do remember being sent a credit card the minute I was 18. I got my own digs in university. I was in a shared house and I got offered a credit card, and I looked at it and went, brilliant, I can afford Christmas now. I can buy my family some Christmas presents. And I didn't understand what it was. Had it been called a debt card, here's a debt card, I would have probably thought twice about it. But essentially that's what they are, isn't it? So it's education and it's responsibility, but at the end of the day it's being able to have enough to be able to pay it back, isn't it? And anticipating that that's secure. And you're right, 2008, it all went belly up, didn't it? So it's tread with caution.
True. So in terms of, you've been in business for a number of years, and you talked about the fact that you work fewer hours, but you want to get your rate up per hour. How hard was it for you to develop the mindset of holding your own when you're negotiating your rate with a potential client?
Yeah, I've done a lot of learning on that actually, and I find it quite fascinating how you negotiate and how you negotiate on pay as well. And sometimes what disappoints me now is that clients sometimes don't want to negotiate, or they're not experienced, or they'll just say, sorry, but we don't have that kind of budget. And then it's the end of the conversation. It's like, no, 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 no. I'm happy to negotiate. Let's talk about what else you could, come up with, or how else I might get value from this that's not necessarily invoiceable. So yeah, there are a number of things. I mean, for example, speaking as a professional speaker, I speak at industry conferences, in-house on leadership programs, that sort of thing. And you can look at your market rate and you can say, oh, I'm a bit like that person, so therefore I'm going to command that. It might be that your destination client is an association or a smaller business. They may not have the budget, but you might want to work with them beyond just that moment, and therefore you can be flexible on your fees. What I see as really tragic is a race to the bottom. And when times are tough, and they have been and they will continue to be for some time, there is a sense of, well, if I just reduce my fees or if I don't put them up, um, then that's going to be okay. That's really not going to help our industry, the wider industry of providing services and content that's really valuable to organizations, and thinking that we need to be cheaper. Actually, you need to be as expensive as you are worth, and looking at the market rate and thinking that when you adding 100 grand to somebody's bottom line because of the work you did with engagement and leaders doing XYZ, then your 5k 10k fee is nothing, is it, in comparison? So it's thinking in those terms. Negotiating, I always think people advise you to ask the client what the budget is. What's your budget? And you get a number. I don't do that. I found it backfires terribly. And they go, oh, we're 5 pence. That's our budget, 5 pence. And I'm like, oh, okay. They're never going to tell you a straight answer on that. So I think if you put the number down first, you're likely to have more control over what you want. And I like to anchor a number. I do a big number first and then watch the client's face. And sometimes they go, great. In which case, note to self, make it a bit bigger next time. Or they go, ooh, and I go, what are you thinking? And I love it. It's a great conversation. Great books on it everywhere. Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference is a great one. He's a former FBI hostage negotiator, and if he doesn't know how to negotiate, then no one does. And yeah, it's a good fun read. So Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss, great on for negotiating.
What advice do you have for the average family, I suppose you could say, who are struggling with the cost of living crisis? They've got a mortgage to pay, there's children in school, the amount of children in university, they're paying university fees. What advice do you have for a family in that situation to try and make ends meet?
Goodness, I mean, I'm not about to give advice to families who need to make ends meet, who can't make ends meet, because I know that most families are sensible enough to know what to do themselves. And I do think it's rather patronising when governments tell us to shop for, the government, a Tory minister recently suggested that in order to ride through the cost of living crisis, we should get your supermarket brand, don't buy a fancy brand. It's like, really, is that the best you can do on advice? I mean, it's shocking. So I think most families know how to manage, and they are managing. Working families are experiencing high levels of poverty and destitution. The system is broken, and no advice about eating beans and going vegetarian is going to cut the mustard with most families, I don't think. It's crap. It's crappy time. It really is. and the economy is really, really quite broken. So, sorry to give you that type of macro advice, John, as opposed to a micro moment of wisdom that I might have. But turn your lights off on the landing. You don't need it. That's